Right now, in the far west of Tibet, there's a mountain that no human being has ever stood on top of. Not once, not in any expedition, not in the entire recorded history of climbing. And that's not because it's too hard to climb. Everest has been summited more than 13,000 times. K2 is so lethal that for decades roughly one climber died for every 4 who reached the summit. And even K2 has been beaten hundreds of times over. But this one peak, lower than 100 mountains around it, has never had a single confirmed climb, because the country that controls it has never once handed out a permit to try. Every other giant in the Himalaya has a way in. This one is sealed, on purpose. And the reason the people who live beneath it give for that is not the one we expected. This is Mount Kailash, and this is why no one is allowed to climb it. First, where this mountain actually sits, because it shapes everything that follows. Kailash stands in the far southwest of Tibet, in a remote region called Ngari, close to the point where Tibet, India, and Nepal all meet. It rises to 6,638 meters. In Himalayan terms, that's modest. Everest stands more than 2 kilometers taller. Dozens of the peaks right around Kailash look down on it. And climbers who've studied its faces say a strong, modern team could probably find a way up. Yet out of every mountain in that whole range, Kailash is the one that has never recorded a single ascent. Sit with that for a second, because it breaks the usual pattern. Almost every unclimbed spot left on this planet belongs to something enormous and deadly. A wall of ice, or a summit so remote that just reaching its base takes weeks. Kailash is none of those things. It's easy to get to. Every year, thousands of people walk right up to the foot of it. They just don't go up. Now look at the mountain itself, because this is where it stops behaving like ordinary geology. Kailash has 4 steep faces, and they line up almost exactly with the 4 points of the compass: north, south, east, and west. From a distance, the whole thing looks less like a mountain and more like a 4-sided pyramid, capped in snow all year round. The explorers who first mapped this region a century ago kept writing the same thing in their notes, independently, decades apart. That it looked too regular, too deliberate, almost like something that had been made. We'll come back to what geologists actually say about that shape, because there's a solid answer, and it's not the one the mystery channels give you. But hold on to that first impression, because people from completely different centuries and cultures, with no contact with each other, all stood in front of this mountain and walked away with the same uneasy feeling, that it doesn't look like an accident. And every one of those cultures landed on the same rule about what you're allowed to do here. You can walk to it. You can walk all the way around it. You cannot go over the top. For most of history, the rule against climbing Kailash was purely a spiritual one, kept by the people who lived around it. Then, in the 20th century, it ran head-on into the modern age of exploration. And this is where the story stops being folklore and becomes documented fact. As European surveyors pushed through the Himalaya, mapping and summiting one great peak after another, Kailash drew attention, because on paper, it looked like an easy target. In 1926, a British colonial officer named Hugh Rutledge circled the mountain and studied its northern face in detail. Rutledge was no amateur. He'd go on to lead major expeditions on Everest itself, and his verdict on Kailash, written in his own account, was that the north face was, in his words, utterly unclimbable. Around the same time, another British explorer, Colonel Wilson, looked at the mountain from the opposite side and believed he'd spotted a workable line up the southeast ridge. Then heavy snow closed the whole approach before he could even test it. 10 years later, in 1936, an Austrian climber named Herbert Tichy came through the region, and, out of curiosity, asked a local official whether the peak could ever be climbed. The answer he wrote down has been repeated in almost every serious account since. Only a man entirely free of sin, the official said, could climb Kailash. And that man wouldn't need to cut steps in the ice. He'd simply turn himself into a bird and fly to the top. He didn't say it as a threat. To the people there, it was just a plain fact. The way you'd describe something that everyone already knows doesn't happen. Then the modern barrier arrived, the concrete one. Tibet came under Chinese control in the early 1950s, and ever since, every expedition into these mountains has needed a permit from the Chinese government. Every major Tibetan peak has a process for exactly that, including the north side of Everest. Climbers apply, they pay, they get their permit, they make their attempt. For Kailash, that process has never once produced a permit. Not for a foreign team, not for a domestic one, not for anyone, for any purpose. It sits permanently outside the system. And when the greatest climber alive was handed away around all of it, he said, no. Back in the mid-1980s, the Chinese authorities offered Reinhold Messner his shot at Kailash. This is the man who was first to climb Everest with no bottled oxygen, and first to summit all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter peaks. He was granted permission to walk the circuit around the mountain, along with a written invitation to come back the next year and climb it. He turned it down. Years later, in 2001, asked about it again, he explained himself. "If we conquer this mountain," he said, "then we conquer something in people's souls." And then he added, "I would suggest they go and climb something a little harder. Kailash is not so high and not so hard, but it is holy." And he wasn't alone in that. Kilian Jornet, one of the greatest mountain athletes of this generation, put it even more plainly. The summit, he said, isn't as interesting as the journey the pilgrims make to it. We don't climb it, out of respect for them. Then, in 2001, the whole question finally came to a head. Word spread that a Spanish team had set out to become the first ever to climb Kailash. And here's the part that gets forgotten. The man leading it, a Galician climber named Jesus Martinez Novas, was no conqueror. In his own letters from that spring, he described the trip as a message of peace and said plainly that he'd never actually climb the mountain without the blessing of the religions it belongs to, and of the Dalai Lama. It made no difference. The instant the plan went public, the reaction was immediate, and it was global. China appears to have approved a permit, and then the whole thing collapsed under the protest. Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain leaders spoke out together. India raised it directly with Beijing. The Dalai Lama's representative in London said the mountain should never be turned into a sporting arena, that it would offend Buddhists and Hindus alike. The British climber Doug Scott called the idea a kick in the teeth for the Tibetans and for millions of Hindus. Messner condemned it too. In the end, no attempt was ever made. And afterward, China made it clear that climbing Kailash would simply not be permitted. It's stayed exactly that way ever since. So why this mountain? Why would a government, 4 religions, and the best climbers in the world all arrive at the same answer, that this one peak should never be touched? Part of it is what flows out of it. Look at a map of Asia and find 4 of its greatest rivers: the Indus, the Sutlej, the Brahmaputra, and the Karnali, which feeds the Ganges. These rivers end up thousands of kilometers apart, in different countries, emptying into different seas, but follow each of them back to its source, and they all lead to the same small corner of western Tibet, around Kailash. All 4 systems rise within about 60 kilometers of this one mountain. Between them, they carry water to more than 1 billion people. The Indus Basin alone supports around 268 million. The Ganges, close to 600 million. The Brahmaputra, over 100 million more. One mountain, sitting at the head of the water for a quarter of the people alive. The people who first described this place, thousands of years ago, had no satellites and no accurate maps. And yet they wrote about a single mountain at the center of the world, with 4 great rivers running out from it toward the 4 directions. When modern surveyors finally reached this remote plateau, that's more or less exactly what they found. That's why Kailash isn't sacred to one faith. It's sacred to 4. In Hinduism, which reveres this mountain in texts far older than Buddhism, Kailash is the home of Shiva, one of the supreme gods, seated in eternal meditation at the axis of the world. This is the oldest of all the claims, and for hundreds of millions of Hindus, it's simply the holiest mountain there is. In Buddhism, it's identified with Mount Meru, the great pillar at the middle of the universe, and it's the setting for the famous contest in which the yogi Milarepa is said to have beaten a rival to win the mountain for his faith. In Jainism, it's Ashtapada, the place where the very first of their great teachers, Rishabhanatha, is said to have reached liberation. And in the ancient Tibetan Bon tradition, older in Tibet than Buddhism itself, it's the 9-story swastika mountain, tied to the sky and to the soul of their founder's world. And all 4 traditions honor it the exact same way, by walking. Pilgrims circle the base of the mountain in a single loop called the Kora. It runs about 52 kilometers up over a high pass called the Dol Mala at more than 5,600 meters in thin, freezing air. Hindus and Buddhists walk it clockwise. Followers of Bon walk it the other way. At one point on the trail, pilgrims lie down and leave something behind: a drop of blood, a lock of hair, an old piece of clothing, to mark the death of the person they used to be. To complete one full circle, they believe, wipes away the sins of a lifetime. To climb over the top would do the opposite. It would be the deepest desecration imaginable of the one place they hold above all others. Quick pause before the strangest part. If you're finding this as fascinating as we do, the best way to help us keep making these deep dives is to hit like and subscribe. And if you're watching this on your TV right now, you can do both straight from your remote. Just like and subscribe right there on screen. Now, to the claims, because this is where most of what you've heard about Kailash starts to fall apart. If you've spent any time watching videos about Kailash, you've heard the mysteries. We'll take them one at a time, because every single one has a real answer sitting underneath it. Start with the most famous claim, that time itself runs differently at Kailash, and that people who stay too long age at an unnatural speed. Their hair and nails, the story goes, grow weeks' worth in a matter of days. It's a genuinely eerie idea. It's also just not what's happening. There's no measurable time distortion on any mountain on Earth. The effect physicists call gravitational time dilation is real. But on the surface of our planet, it amounts to a few billionths of a second over an entire year. And it runs the other way anyway. Clocks higher up tick very slightly faster, not slower. What pilgrims are actually experiencing at that altitude is far more ordinary and far more brutal. The ultraviolet radiation up there is savage. The air is bone dry, and the body burns through itself under the stress of extreme height. That combination does real, visible things to skin, hair, and nails in a matter of days. It just isn't supernatural. Then there's the claim that compasses spin and instruments fail near the mountain, and that even NASA has picked up some strange energy coming off it. Here's the problem with that one. There is no NASA report. It doesn't exist. Compasses can waver near rock that's rich in magnetic minerals, like magnetite. And that's true of a great many mountains. And it breaks no law of physics at all. And the reason aircraft don't fly directly over Kailash has nothing to do with an energy field. It's the same reason they avoid a lot of the high Himalaya, the terrain, and the altitude. And then there's the biggest claim of all, the shape of the mountain itself. The idea that Kailash is too symmetrical to be natural, that it's a colossal man-made pyramid built by someone a very long time ago. Almost all of this traces back to a single Russian expedition in 1999, led by an eye surgeon named Ernst Muldashev, who came home claiming Kailash was the hub of a whole complex of ancient pyramids, and that he'd heard strange sounds coming from inside the mountain. His conclusions have been rejected across the board by actual geologists. And the real explanation for that pyramid shape is genuinely fascinating on its own. Kailash is built from nearly horizontal layers of sedimentary rock, stacked like a deck of cards, and lifted up by the same slow collision that raised the entire Himalaya. Then hundreds of thousands of years of ice and weather cut down through those flat layers. What's left is those four steep, oddly regular faces, and the horizontal lines running across them that look, from far away, almost like courses of stone blocks. It wasn't built, it was carved, by ice and time, out of rock that was already stacked in layers, which is, in its own quiet way, stranger than any pyramid. So that's the pattern. Every headline mystery about Kailash, the aging, the time, the compasses, the pyramid, has a real explanation underneath it. And in most cases, that real explanation is more remarkable than the myth. But there's one more claim, the one at the center of almost every viral video about this mountain right now. And unlike all the others, that one wasn't a real thing blown out of proportion. Somebody invented it from nothing. Maybe you've seen the videos. There's a whole wave of them right now. Tibetan monks, they claim, have finally broken their silence and revealed a secret hidden inside Mount Kailash, an ancient manuscript, a sealed chamber, a hidden text that describes the mountain as some kind of cosmic anchor point and warns about the end of the world and the seed of whatever comes after. These clips have pulled tens of millions of views in the last few months alone. So we did the obvious thing. We went looking for that text. We looked for the monk who supposedly revealed it. We looked for the monastery that supposedly kept it. We even tried to find the manuscript itself, or any scholar who'd ever read it, or any record of it existing at all. And here's what we came back with. Nothing. There's no named monk anywhere in it. There's no monastery attached to the story. There's no manuscript, no translation, no source. The whole thing traces back to other videos, and to blogs recycling those videos, in a loop that never once touches a single real document. It was made up, and you can catch the tell, because most of these videos can't even get the basics right. They call them Chinese monks. They aren't. The monks around Kailash are Tibetan, and Tibet has been under Chinese control since the 1950s. A story that can't name the right country for its own monks isn't working from a hidden manuscript. And here's what makes that worth saying out loud. Kailash never needed an invented secret. The people making these videos reached for a fake mystery because they never bothered to look at the real one. Because everything we've already walked through is true, documented, and on the record. A mountain that no human has ever been allowed to stand on top of. 4 of the world's great rivers pouring off it toward 1 billion people. 4 separate religions going back thousands of years, all agreeing that it's the center of the world, and that no one may ever climb it. The greatest climbers alive turning down the chance, out of respect. None of that is a story anyone had to make up. It was here the whole time. We live in an age that has mapped almost everything. Satellites photograph every ridge on the planet. Drones fly over the summit of Everest. There's almost nowhere left that a person or a machine hasn't reached and put on a screen. And in the middle of all of that, there's Kailash, exactly where it's always been. No one has climbed it. No one owns it. It stays off limits on purpose, by the agreement of a government, 4 faiths, and the climbers who could reach the top and chose not to. For thousands of years, the millions of people who come to this mountain have been asked to do just one thing: walk around it and leave the summit alone. And they have. In an age that treats every peak as something to be claimed, that restraint is the real mystery of Kailash. And it has nothing to do with whatever is supposedly hidden inside it. The fact that we agreed, across every border and every belief, to leave one mountain untouched, and then actually kept our word. Whether there's anything more to it than that, no one alive can tell you for certain. But maybe the forbidden question was never what's up there. Maybe the real question is what it says about us, that of all the places on Earth, this is the one we chose not to take. There's another place with almost the same story, a site a government sealed shut that scientists are quietly desperate to get inside and that no one is allowed to enter. That one we'll get into next time.